Rich billionaire marries his mistress. But when his wife shows up in style, he instantly regrets it. How far would you go to preserve your dignity, to fight for love, or to reclaim everything that once belonged to you? In the glittering world of the ultra-wealthy, secrets and scandals rarely stay buried, and when the richest man in town decides to wed his mistress in a public display of betrayal, all eyes turn to the wife he so callously discarded. Yet behind the scenes, a cunning plan is about to unfold. Our story begins with an unexpected entry at the grandest wedding of the season, poised to shake society to its core. Trust us, you won't want to miss a single moment of this explosive drama. Leonard Leo Harrington was known across the globe for his shrewd business empire. He had acquired stakes in global technology giants, spearheaded philanthropic organizations, and remained at the helm of Harrington Enterprises, a conglomerate that dabbled in everything from real estate to pharmaceutical innovations. Newspapers like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal lauded him as the man who never fails. Despite the accolades, rumors swirled in Manhattan's elite circles about his personal life. He was married to Eleanor Quinn Harrington, an heiress in her own right, old money from the Quinn family estate that had shaped parts of the East Coast for decades. Their marriage was once celebrated as the union of two powerful dynasties. But of late, there had been more than whispers about Leo's roving eye, particularly toward his new mistress, Serafina Sarah Morris. Unlike Eleanor, whose old money upbringing lent her an understated elegance, Sarah was a tempest. A former model turned marketing consultant, she thrived on the spotlight. It was said that she wore her ambition like perfume, bold, lingering, impossible to ignore. Sarah and Leo's affair was, according to the tabloids, the worst-kept secret in New York. Yet nobody dared to confront Leo outright, partly because, in the realm of the ultra-rich, gossip and rumors were currency, and no one wanted to risk losing favor with a man who basically owned half of Manhattan. Behind the scenes, though, events were spinning out of control. Eleanor had confronted Leo several times about Sarah. He'd brushed aside her concerns with practiced charm. "You know you're the one," he'd whisper, kissing her forehead, but coming home later and later, sometimes not at all. The staff in the Harrington penthouse at 432 Park Avenue would scurry to hide any evidence of his nights out. But still, the truth seeped into the cracks of the marriage. It came to a head on an autumn evening when Eleanor quietly packed a bag and slipped out of the penthouse, leaving behind a note on the marble kitchen counter. She'd had enough of the lies, enough of being taken for granted. She was the sophisticated daughter of the Quinn dynasty. She knew her worth. If Leo couldn't appreciate that, she'd rather carve her own path. It wasn't exactly a scandalous departure. She was discreet. Most of the staff assumed she'd gone away on business. So did Leo. He barely noticed she'd left until he realized that the closet was half empty. The morning he stood in front of the open closet doors, with hangers swaying gently as if to mock him, his heart lurched, but guilt, if he felt any, morphed quickly into a twisted sense of liberation. Perhaps, he reasoned, their separation was the first step toward building a new life with Sarah. So, while Eleanor kept a low profile in Boston, staying with her cousin Dr. Rachel Sanders, a well-respected neurosurgeon, Leo decided to make a public statement. He would marry Sarah. Never mind that his marriage to Eleanor was still legally intact. Never mind that the world was still in the dark about the finality of that union. He wanted to show everyone that he was unstoppable, and if that meant throwing the most lavish wedding the country had ever seen, so be it. Little did he know, this grand gesture would spark the beginning of a saga he would regret for the rest of his life. News of Leo's plan to wed Sarah spread like wildfire. Social media platforms like Instagram and Twitter practically exploded overnight. Although neither Leo nor Sarah confirmed the news outright at first, word trickled out that an extravagant ceremony was being planned in a private villa on the Amalfi coast. The rumor mill speculated the guest list: top Hollywood celebrities, international dignitaries, and high-flying entrepreneurs. Magazines quickly labeled it the wedding of the century. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. Paparazzi camped outside Harrington Enterprises headquarters and staked out Serra's luxury apartment in Soho. It was said that Serra personally commissioned an Italian designer, Alessandro Moretti, a real-life couture visionary known among Manhattan socialites, to create her wedding gown. She wanted silk flown in from France, hand-stitched embroidered pearls from Hong Kong, and the perfect silhouette that would highlight every curve she had used to capture Leo's attention in the first place. Despite her initial heartbreak, Eleanor was neither idle nor ignorant of these developments. She hadn't filed for divorce yet. Why she hadn't done so remained a mystery even to her cousin Rachel. Maybe it was a mixture of hope, pride, or a strategic play only Eleanor could fully understand. One morning, while sipping tea in the high-ceiling study of Rachel's Boston home, Eleanor came across an op-ed by a society columnist in Vanity Fair. The writer lamented the downfall of the gracious Eleanor Quinn Harrington and insinuated she was a relic of an older era, unable to keep her husband's interest, overshadowed by modern daring women like Sarah Morris. Eleanor's cheeks grew hot. She wasn't outraged just for herself, but for every woman who had been pushed aside as if they were old news. "It's time to fight back," Rachel said softly, noticing the furious glint in Eleanor's eyes. Eleanor nodded. She had contacts in the highest realms of society, connections that rivaled those of her husband. Now she decided she would use them. For the first time since leaving Manhattan, she felt the flames of her old fighting spirit reignite. Her next move was subtle but potent. She reached out to Michael Chen, an old family friend and an investigative journalist who currently worked for a respected news network in New York. Through coded, measured conversation, she arranged to leak a crucial piece of information: a quiet, ongoing lawsuit filed by Harrington Enterprises employees who claimed workplace harassment and intimidation under Sarah's short-lived but brutal management style. This was something Leo had tried to hush up by paying off lawyers, but the case remained dangerously close to the surface. The leak stirred a fresh pot of chaos. Overnight, the media narrative around Sarah shifted from starry-eyed fiancé to cunning social climber. The wedding was still on, but for the first time, public sentiment wasn't universally fawning. Sarah, outraged, demanded Leo handle the matter. He tried to appease her by doubling down on his PR efforts, hiring top crisis management experts. Tensions escalated behind the scenes. It was the first real argument between the bride and groom-to-be. Sarah accused Leo of not protecting her image. Leo resented the whining. After all, he had thrown her into the limelight, and this was part of the game. Little did they know, Eleanor was just getting started. In the weeks leading to the grandiose wedding, alliances formed and enemies revealed themselves. This was high society after all. Wealth and influence often danced in a treacherous tango. One day you're clinking champagne glasses at the same table. The next, you're stabbing each other in the back over multi-million-dollar deals or personal betrayals. Eleanor, with the discreet help of Rachel Sanders, made several phone calls to powerful acquaintances. She spoke with Lydia Beaumont, a prominent socialite and philanthropic figure in New York, as well as Josephine Rothschild, an old friend from finishing school in Switzerland. Both women had felt snubbed by Sarah in the past. Lydia, especially, carried a deep resentment because Sarah had once humiliated her at a charity gala by publicly downplaying Lydia's philanthropic accomplishments. The sting of that slight still burned. Josephine, on the other hand, had tried to befriend Sarah, extending an invitation to an exclusive weekend trip to the Hamptons, but was coldly ignored. The incident bruised Josephine's pride, setting her firmly against the ambitious mistress-turned-bride. So, when Eleanor confided in them, they were more than happy to lend their support. A plan began to form. Eleanor would attend the wedding. She had never been officially uninvited, and her marriage to Leo was still legally binding. But she needed an entry point that would humiliate Leo and Sarah, ensuring she reclaimed some of her own dignity. More importantly, she wanted to show the world who she really was. Meanwhile, Leo scrambled to keep everything together. The wedding date in Italy was looming closer. His PR team was in overdrive, trying to contain the lawsuits and gossip. Sarah, in her typical style, decided the best defense was a bold offense. She invited cameras from a high-profile streaming service to document the final week leading up to the wedding, calling it a docu-series about modern love. In reality, it was a vanity project designed to shift the public narrative back in her favor. Cameras started rolling. Sarah examining flower arrangements, tasting artisanal cakes, and overseeing the decorators. To the outside observer, it looked like a fairy tale, but the staff witnessed endless fits of temper whenever something didn't meet her standards. The docu-series producers whispered among themselves, this might be the biggest goldmine of unscripted drama they'd ever captured. During a particularly tense moment, while trying on her custom Alessandro Moretti gown, Sarah flung a crystal-embellished slipper across the atelier because the stitching on her train wasn't delicate enough. Alessandro, famed for his temper as well, threatened to quit unless she reined in her tantrums. Leo had to intervene, writing Alessandro a massive bonus check just to keep him from walking out. That hush money of sorts set Leo back a fortune, but for him, money was secondary to saving his public image. But what none of them realized was that the biggest twist was quietly brewing behind the scenes, orchestrated by none other than Eleanor Quinn Harrington. Eleanor had always been graceful, but beneath her polite exterior lay a strategic mind, nurtured by a lifetime of high-stakes boardroom politics. Growing up in the Quinn family, she'd witnessed her father negotiate multi-billion-dollar deals over dinners that seemed more like chess matches than social gatherings. She knew how to observe, plan, and strike at precisely the right moment. Returning quietly to New York a week before the wedding, she chose to stay at the St. Regis Hotel under an assumed name, Elizabeth Gray, a subtle nod to her grandmother's maiden name. She kept her presence secret from the press. Lydia and Josephine provided her with daily updates on wedding preparations, letting her know which private jets were scheduled to fly out and when. Meanwhile, the lawsuit on Harrington Enterprises was catching more media attention. Several employees were no longer willing to be silenced, describing a toxic environment overseen by Sarah. Michael Chen's thorough investigative pieces gave voice to the plaintiffs, who accused Sarah of ridiculing them, threatening their careers, and forcing them to work unreasonable hours. The docu-series cameras tried to tiptoe around the scandal, focusing on the glamour, but viewers on social media were not oblivious. Leo held an emergency strategy meeting at Harrington Enterprises. Sarah attended via video call from Italy, where she was finalizing wedding details. Her mood was icy. Dressed in a luxurious silk robe, she glowered at the board members, demanding they do something to quash the story. The board members, mostly older men with conservative sensibilities, were taken aback by her aggressive demands. She barked orders, told them to bribe or threaten the plaintiffs into backing off. Some of them cast nervous glances at each other. It was one thing to protect Leo. He was the goose that laid the golden eggs, but Sarah was quickly becoming a liability. Eleanor, watching from her vantage point, decided it was time to make her move. She would attend the wedding, accompanied by a coterie of supporters, but she needed more than just a dramatic entrance. She needed undeniable proof that would turn the tide of public opinion in her favor. She arranged for a hidden camera and microphone, carefully sewn into her designer clutch, courtesy of an old college friend who worked in high-tech espionage for government contracts. By capturing the chaos, cruelty, and possibly even admissions of wrongdoing, Eleanor hoped not only to expose the sham of this wedding, but to protect the employees who had suffered under Sarah's rule. She also wanted to show the world she was not a victim to be pitied, but a formidable force in her own right. The wedding was set to take place at a centuries-old villa perched on the cliffs of Ravello, offering sweeping views of the Mediterranean Sea. High walls and wrought-iron gates shielded the property from prying eyes, while private security patrolled the perimeter. Regardless, paparazzi from around the world lined the winding roads below, hoping to snap a lucrative photo. Luxury cars, helicopters, and private yachts ferried guests to the lavish locale. Celebrities arrived in droves. A-list actors, Grammy-winning musicians, and a scattering of tech billionaires who had partnered with Leo. Sarah reveled in this dazzling display of her new social standing. Her father, Thomas Morris, who'd been mostly absent throughout her life, showed up wearing a tuxedo he could barely afford, marveling at how far his daughter had come. To maintain an air of exclusivity, Sarah had ordered that all guests hand over their phones upon arrival. Security details also scanned for cameras. Nobody was allowed to overshadow the official docu-series team, who had exclusive rights to filming the event. Of course, Sarah didn't suspect that a carefully concealed camera was already walking through the villa's gates, hidden in the clutch of the woman she hadn't imagined would dare show her face. Eleanor Quinn Harrington. Eleanor, looking resplendent in a floor-length navy gown from the Quinn family archives, stepped out of a sleek black limousine with Lydia and Josephine flanking her. Heads turned. Whispers flitted from guest to guest. Some recognized her and tried to keep a polite distance, while others gawked at the unspoken tension. She walked with her chin held high, her posture a silent declaration that she wasn't here to be pitied or shunned. The staff ushered guests into an open courtyard filled with white orchids, floating candles, and a gently tinkling fountain at the center. Live classical music wafted through the air. Pinkish gold light from the setting sun illuminated the pink and orange-hued buildings on the coastline below, making the entire scene look like a living postcard. Sarah was in a private suite, having her makeup touched up, while the docu-series cameras hovered around her. She had no idea Eleanor was there, yet. Leo, on the other hand, received the news from a flustered wedding coordinator who stumbled over his words. "Sir, Mr. Harrington, your wife has arrived." Leo's face paled. A bolt of uneasy shock rippled through him. He thought of telling security to escort her out. But how would that look? The scandal would be massive. He told the coordinator to let her stay. For the moment, he needed time to figure out a damage control plan. But as he glimpsed at his reflection in a gilded mirror, adjusting his bow tie, he couldn't shake an unsettling feeling in the pit of his stomach. A feeling that perhaps he'd gravely underestimated Eleanor. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at sunset, a romantic hour that bathed the Amalfi cliffs in soft amber light. Rows of chairs faced an elegant marble altar draped with cascades of white roses. In the front row sat business tycoons and celebrities, all murmuring in anticipation. The docuseries cameras panned across the guests, capturing the tension that seemed to crackle in the atmosphere. Leo stood at the altar, trying to maintain the facade of a confident groom. His mind raced as he recalled the defiant look on Eleanor's face whenever she was cornered. Calm, intense, and dangerously intelligent. He told himself that he had the upper hand. The wedding was happening. The guests were here, and Eleanor couldn't possibly cause a scene in front of such esteemed company. Still, he couldn't control the cold sweat forming beneath his perfectly tailored tuxedo jacket. Finally, Sarah appeared at the end of the aisle, arm in arm with her father, Thomas Morris. She wore her custom Alessandro Moretti gown, a shimmering masterpiece that hugged her figure before flaring into an exquisite lace train. Gasps of awe fluttered through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in for close-ups of her triumphant smile as she basked in the envy and admiration of everyone present. Leo watched her approach, reminding himself that this was the new path he had chosen, for better or worse. Then, without warning, the hush of awe turned to a collective gasp that rippled through the crowd. Heads pivoted away from the bride. People began to whisper frantically, pointing. Approaching from the opposite end of the courtyard was Eleanor, stepping into the aisle with an air of quiet authority. The ceremony had not officially started. The officiant was waiting for Sarah to reach the altar. Eleanor's sudden appearance halted the entire wedding procession. Sarah froze, uncertain whether to keep walking or to confront the unwelcome intruder. Her father whispered something to her, and her grip tightened around his arm. The docu-series cameras swung around, capturing the moment in real time. Eleanor was calm, her gaze fixed on Leo. Lydia and Josephine stood by the edge of the aisle, ready to intervene if necessary. You could hear a pin drop as Eleanor slowly turned to address the assembled guests, her voice carrying a graceful self-assurance. "Good evening, everyone," she began. "I don't mean to interrupt this celebration." She paused, letting the tension build. "But I believe some clarity is needed here." Leo opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Sarah's face twisted with fury and disbelief. Her father stepped back, unaccustomed to such a display of defiance. Eleanor continued, "I am Eleanor Quinn Harrington, Leo's wife. As many of you know, we have not finalized our divorce. There are unresolved matters. This ceremony, while impressive, does not negate certain legal truths." Sarah let out a strangled cry. "What are you doing here?" She broke away from her father, marched up the aisle, and stood just feet from Eleanor, trembling with rage. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every nuance of the confrontation. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some guests standing up from their seats as if expecting an all-out brawl. Eleanor held her ground. "I'm here to remind everyone that no matter how lavish an event, no matter how carefully curated the guest list or the PR strategy, truth cannot be bought or buried. Leo is still my husband, and this," she gestured around her, "this spectacle is a travesty, not just against me, but against the institution you claim to uphold." Sarah, seething, turned to Leo. "Do something. Have her removed." Security guards edged closer, but they hesitated, unsure how to proceed against the legitimate wife. Leo finally managed to speak, though his voice shook. "Eleanor, please, let's handle this privately. Don't cause a scene." Eleanor gave a sad, ironic laugh. "You caused this scene long before I arrived." And with that, everything plunged into chaos. The docu-series cameras were still rolling, capturing guests whispering, some even beginning to leave. The officiant looked mortified, clutching a leather-bound book while scanning the courtyard for guidance. Then, as if scripted for the highest drama, a thunderous crack sounded in the sky above. Dark clouds that had gathered over the sea unleashed a sudden downpour, sending the perfectly orchestrated wedding into further disarray. Women shrieked as they scrambled to protect their designer gowns. Men ducked under the floral arches. The officiant's book was soaked. The sound equipment sputtered and fizzled, and Sarah's meticulously styled hair fell into wet, bedraggled strands. Eleanor calmly took a step back, umbrella in hand, provided by a well-prepared Josephine, and disappeared into the villa. Sarah screamed after her, voice lost in the chaos of the storm. Leo stood there, drenched and humiliated, unable to piece together how everything had fallen apart so suddenly. But this was only the beginning of the unraveling. Huddled inside the ornate drawing room of the villa, guests tried to dry off and salvage what they could of their evening. Rain pummeled the windows, and the once picturesque coastline vanished behind a curtain of grey. Leo and Sarah retreated to a smaller side lounge, the docu-series cameras trailing them like predatory hawks. As soon as they had a semblance of privacy, Sarah rounded on Leo. "This is all your fault," she screeched, tears mingling with rivulets of rainwater and mascara streaking her cheeks. "You said she wouldn't be an issue. You promised me this day would be perfect. Instead, I'm a laughingstock." Leo couldn't find the words to calm her. His own fury and embarrassment were choking him. He glanced at the cameras, half wishing they'd shut off, but they were contractually obligated to keep rolling. This was the drama they'd hoped for. Meanwhile, Eleanor, safe in a private suite, carefully removed the concealed recording device from her clutch. She called Michael Chen, who was awaiting her update in New York. She told him she had footage of the meltdown, the confrontation, everything that would cement the truth in the public sphere once and for all. Michael was ecstatic. If aired, it would go viral, overshadowing all the curated PR that Leo and Sarah had orchestrated. But that wasn't Eleanor's only goal. She intended to use this footage to help the lawsuit plaintiffs. Documenting Sarah's explosive temper and borderline abusive language during the confrontation might add weight to their claims of harassment. Just then, Lydia knocked on the door, entering with Josephine at her side. Both were breathless and exhilarated. "I think we should leave before security tries to corner you," Josephine said. "Things are getting tense out there." Eleanor nodded, her gaze steely. "I'm done here. Let's go." Outside the villa, the storm raged. Security guards scrambled to protect equipment from the rain, allowing Eleanor and her allies to slip away. They climbed into a waiting car, the tires churning through puddles. As the villa's gates closed behind them, Eleanor exhaled. The first phase of her plan was complete. Back inside, Sarah paced manically, ranting about how they could salvage the wedding. Leo, drained, finally said, "It's over, Sarah. We can't continue this ceremony tonight." The officiant left. Half the guests have scattered. "The storm, everything. Just accept it." Her eyes blazed. "We'll do it tomorrow, or whenever the rain stops. I'll pay extra for the guests to stay. We can still make this happen." Leo stared at her, astonished by her desperation. Perhaps he saw her in a new light, one that revealed just how far she was willing to go to maintain the illusion of triumph. The illusions were crumbling, though, and for the first time, Leo felt the icy chill of regret creeping into his heart. By morning, the rain had ceased, leaving behind a vivid sunrise over the glistening sea. However, the atmosphere within the villa was tense. Many guests had already departed, unwilling to be part of a scandalous spectacle. A smaller crowd remained, mostly the docuseries crew, and a handful of close associates loyal to Leo, though not necessarily to Sarah. Word spread quickly across social media. Clips of Eleanor's confrontation, recorded on guests' personal devices before they handed them over, went viral. The official docu-series footage had yet to be edited or released, but the raw phone recordings were damning enough. Media outlets across the globe had a field day. Headlines declared, "Billionaire's wife crashes wedding to mistress, scandal in Amalfi," and "Leo Harrington's empire in jeopardy as lawsuits mount." At the same time, Sarah's meltdown overshadowed any goodwill that might have existed toward her. Rumors circulated that Alessandro Moretti was threatening to pull his name from her gown design, refusing to be associated with such chaos. The staff at the villa reported she had locked herself in a suite, refusing to come out except to scream at whoever dared to approach the door. Leo, tired and disillusioned, sat in the library with a glass of whiskey in hand. The docu-series producer approached him, quietly asking if they should continue filming. His mind spun with regret, anger, and confusion. He told them to keep rolling. Perhaps a part of him wanted a record of his downfall, a cautionary tale for others. Or maybe he still believed he could salvage his reputation if he managed the narrative just right. That afternoon, the second blow arrived, an injunction from a U.S. court freezing certain Harrington Enterprises assets related to the ongoing employee lawsuit. It was a bold move, signaling the courts took the allegations seriously. This could spell trouble for major business deals in progress. Leo had planned to sign a multi-million-dollar contract with an European pharma giant that very week, but now, with assets frozen, everything was in limbo. By evening, Sarah emerged from her self-imposed exile. Gone was the lavish wedding gown. Instead, she wore a simple slip dress, hair pulled back. Approaching Leo, she tried to reason with him, her voice subdued. "We can still fix this," she whispered. "We just need to push forward with the wedding, quietly. We have enough people here, enough resources to make it official." Leo looked at her with weary eyes. "Sarah, don't you see what's happening? The courts are involved. My wife, my actual wife, has proof of everything. Public sentiment is against us, and to top it off, half the people we invited are either gone or want nothing to do with us now. The company is in crisis." She reached out to touch his shoulder. "We're better together. If we show a united front, we might still control the narrative." Something snapped inside Leo. He recalled the early days with Eleanor, her warm smiles, their shared dreams. He remembered her unwavering support, her quiet but formidable intelligence, and the dignity with which she carried herself. Compared to that, What had he gained by chasing the thrill of Sarah's excitement? Suddenly, the grand illusions he'd built around Sarah seemed hollow. "I'm not sure we are better together, Sarah," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I think I made a mistake." Her eyes widened, tears of rage or heartbreak threatening to spill. But before she could respond, the docu-series cameras hovered near them. She caught sight of the red recording light, immediately altering her demeanor, as though searching for the right angle to look her best. Leo watched the transformation, a bitter taste filling his mouth. He realized that she was more in love with the idea of being a billionaire's wife than with him. With a heavy sigh, he signaled to the cameras, "Turn those off. Now." 4 days later, Leo arrived in Boston, stepping off his private jet with a sense of trepidation he'd never felt before. He came alone, having left Sarah in Italy amid the wreckage of their aborted wedding. He had cancelled all further filming, effectively ending the docu-series. There was too much damage to contain, and he needed to confront the root of it all, his fractured relationship with Eleanor. He took a car to Dr. Rachel Sanders's home, where he knew Eleanor had been staying. The modest brownstone contrasted sharply with the grandeur of their New York penthouse, but it radiated a warmth that reminded him of simpler times. He knocked on the door, heart pounding. Rachel opened it, her expression an unreadable blend of disapproval and caution. "She's in the study," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Eleanor was seated by a window, reading documents related to the lawsuits. She looked up as he entered, setting the papers aside. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy with unspoken regrets. Finally, Leo began, his voice quieter than usual. "Eleanor, I'm sorry." She studied him carefully, noting the weariness etched into his features. "What are you sorry for?" His gaze dropped. "Everything. For betraying your trust, for humiliating you, for allowing myself to be swept up in something so empty." Eleanor's face was calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of sadness. "It's more than humiliation, Leo. You shattered our marriage. The vows we took meant something to me." He nodded, anguish flickering across his features. "They meant something to me too. I lost sight of that. And now I'm paying the price. My company is in jeopardy. The wedding fiasco has become an international scandal. But more importantly, I've hurt you, the one person who genuinely cared for me before I was this." He gestured vaguely, indicating the billionaire tycoon persona he had become. She folded her hands in her lap. "I won't pretend it doesn't feel good to see some justice served, especially for those employees who were tormented by Sarah. I'm going to do everything I can to ensure they're protected." He swallowed hard. "I understand. I want to make things right, legally and morally. I'll cooperate with your lawyers, whatever it takes." Their eyes met. For the first time in years, there was an openness between them that felt raw and real. "I appreciate that," she said softly. "But as for us, I'm not sure if things can ever be the same." Leo's voice wavered. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, at least not right now. I just wanted you to know I regret everything. If there's any chance we could talk, at least to find closure, I'd be grateful." Eleanor exhaled slowly, as though releasing years of pent-up emotion. "I think we both need to figure out what's next, separate from each other's expectations. But I'm willing to talk, to find a path forward, even if it's not the one we originally planned." In that moment, Leo realized there was still a sliver of hope, though not necessarily for rekindling their marriage. Rather, hope for taking responsibility, for becoming a better version of himself, someone Eleanor could, at the very least, respect again. A frosty wind swept through the streets of New York City, marking the passage of months since the Amalfi coast disaster that upended countless lives, including those of Leo Harrington and Eleanor Quinn Harrington. In the aftermath of the storm, Harrington Enterprises moved swiftly to settle the lawsuit brought forward by its aggrieved employees. Under the watchful gaze of both the media and the courts, Leo agreed to a formal hearing that resulted in a massive financial settlement, provisions for workplace reforms, and a zero-tolerance policy against future abuses. Sarah Morris, whose misdeeds had sparked the lawsuit, was barred from any leadership or consulting role in Harrington Enterprises. She managed to avoid direct legal charges, but paid a staggering sum in damages. Publicly, Sarah shed theatrical tears on syndicated morning shows, insisting she was misunderstood, a victim of tabloid exaggeration. Yet her once rising star began its downward spiral. High society circles quietly shut their doors to her. Luxury brand invitations dried up. Her social media posts, formerly littered with designer tags and glamorous selfies, now carried an air of desperation, as though she was clinging to a fading spotlight. Meanwhile, Eleanor's life took a quietly empowering turn. Buoyed by her newfound sense of purpose, she partnered with her friend Lydia Beaumont to launch the Quinn Beaumont Initiative, a foundation dedicated to promoting safe and equitable work environments for women and marginalized employees. The scandal had ignited a wave of public support, and their first fundraising gala raised millions of dollars. They channeled these funds into legal aid, advocacy programs, and leadership seminars designed to dismantle systemic mistreatment in the workplace. For Leo, the upheaval forced a personal reckoning. No longer could he hide behind the polished veneer of a self-made mogul impervious to scandal. Stepping down as CEO, even if only temporarily, proved both a strategic and a deeply personal decision. An interim board took over the daily operations of Harrington Enterprises, while Leo began a journey of introspection. He sought out therapists, joined weekend retreats for executives aiming to adopt ethical leadership models, and worked closely with PR advisors to manage the public fallout. But more than salvaging his reputation, Leo realized he needed to rediscover the principles he'd lost in the glitz and glamour of unchecked power. Still, the lingering question of Eleanor weighed heavily on his mind. He replayed their confrontation at the wedding, her poised yet cutting words revealing a strength that he had underestimated. He recalled the quieter, happier days of their earlier marriage. Long walks through the gardens of her family estate, late-night brainstorming sessions where she'd offer thoughtful insights for his business ventures. He replayed these memories in the hush of his penthouse living room, feeling an ache of regret that surpassed any financial blow. On a wintry evening, he found himself wandering aimlessly down Fifth Avenue, dodging holiday shoppers and tourists, snapping photos of the city's shimmering Christmas window displays. Drawn by the softly illuminated spires of St. Patrick's Cathedral, he slipped inside, drawn by the echoes of his own loneliness and remorse. Rows of pews stretched before him in neat lines, bathed in the glow of flickering votive candles. Stained glass windows glistened with color, casting fragmented light along the polished floor. Seeking solace, Leo settled near the front, running a hand over his tired eyes. Scenes from the past year collided in his mind, the allure of Sarah, the adrenaline of a forbidden affair, and finally the emptiness of his triumph turned tragedy. He closed his eyes, unsure if he was actually praying or merely hoping that someone would guide him toward redemption. That was when he felt the lightest brush of a hand against his shoulder. He looked up, heart thudding, to meet Eleanor's gentle gaze. Wrapped in a wool coat and scarf, she appeared hesitant yet resolute, her posture signaling she'd come of her own free will. "I heard you've been coming here," she said softly, her voice echoing off the cathedral's stone arches. "Rachel told me. I wanted to see for myself." A swirl of conflicting emotions tightened Leo's chest. Gratitude, longing, and apprehension all threatened to overwhelm him. I never thought you'd come," he managed, stepping aside to offer her space in the pew. She sat, hands clasped in her lap. "It seems we both have a lot on our minds," she said, scanning the cathedral's towering columns. "This place makes you feel small enough to remember what truly matters." Leo exhaled slowly, as if releasing months of pent-up regret. "I've done terrible things," he began. To you, to us. I'm not sure an apology will ever be enough. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, the flickering candles reflecting in her eyes. An apology won't fix everything, she acknowledged. But seeing you here taking responsibility for once means something. Sarah's out of your life? He nodded. Yes, completely. The wedding was never legally valid, of course, and she's been removed from any role in my company. We no longer have any relationship, personal or professional. A faint, sad smile curved Eleanor's lips. I never imagined we'd find ourselves in a cathedral discussing the wreckage of what was once a loving marriage. But life rarely follows a script. She turned toward him, her gaze resolute. I've been reflecting too. Our marriage, and how two people can become so lost despite having all the advantages in the world. Somehow we both forgot who we were at our core. He swallowed the emotion building in his throat. I forgot you, the real you, and I forgot who I used to be before ambition became my only compass. Outside, a flurry of snow began to drift across the bustling avenue. Inside, the cathedral stood as a sanctuary for two souls fumbling toward forgiveness. Eleanor let silence speak for a moment, as though testing whether she could trust him again. I'm not sure if I can ever forget what you did, she said at last, but I've learned a lot about myself these past months, my strength, my purpose, and I know that part of me still hopes you can learn from your mistakes. Relief and uncertainty mingled in Leo's face. I want to, he said simply. I'm taking steps in therapy and with my board to ensure I don't fall into those old traps. If there's any way we can find common ground, maybe not right away but in time, I'd do whatever it takes. She nodded slowly, choosing her next words with care. Let's start by acknowledging we've both changed. We may never go back to how things were, but maybe that's okay. We can try to forge something new, cautiously, respectfully. If we fail, at least we'll know we tried. He reached out, gently covering her hand with his. The tension in her shoulders eased, though she didn't fully lean into his touch. It was a tender, tremulous moment, lit by the glow of cathedral candles and the muted roar of traffic outside. All I ask is for the chance to try, he whispered. She nodded, a tear glistening at the corner of her eye, and in the hush of that sacred space they found a fragile understanding, not a clean slate, but an opening, a first step away from regret and toward the possibility of renewal. A pale sun peeked through the steel-grey clouds over Manhattan, reflecting off the glass towers that had once been silent witnesses to Leo Harrington's meteoric rise and his subsequent crash to Earth. Months bled into a year after the ill-fated wedding on the Amalfi coast, and in that time life carried on in hushed but profound ways. Leo and Eleanor had not reconciled overnight. Instead, they approached each other with the caution of two people who had been burned, yet remained oddly hopeful for warmth. Their first steps were tentative. Simple phone calls to check in, emails about mundane household matters like shared investments and property taxes, even the occasional update about mutual acquaintances. These small forms of communication broke the ice that had, at one point, felt as thick as a glacier. Eventually, they decided to attend couples therapy together, not with any grand illusions of immediate reconciliation, but as a way to process the trauma, anger, and disappointment that had built up like a dam under pressure. In the discreet office of Dr. Martina Kaplan, a top-rated marital counselor in the Upper East Side, they spoke haltingly at first, but soon discovered the catharsis in airing their resentments face to face. I felt invisible, Eleanor confessed one afternoon, her voice trembling with equal parts hurt and relief. I was trying so hard to hold us together, and you were already miles away, chasing something else. Across from her, Leo looked down at his folded hands. I convinced myself I deserved whatever I wanted, he admitted. But I lost the only thing that really mattered in the process. Week by week, these sessions became less about blaming one another and more about understanding the choices that had led them astray. They didn't resolve everything in a tidy bow. Real life rarely offers such neat resolutions, but they found a space to explore whether their partnership had enough solid ground left to stand on. Meanwhile, Harrington Enterprises navigated a dramatic transformation. After the massive settlement with wronged employees and the introduction of strict new corporate policies, the company found itself under the leadership of an interim board. This board was composed of seasoned professionals who valued ethical leadership as much as profit margins. They initiated wellness programs, instituted protections for whistleblowers, and collaborated with the Quinn Beaumont Initiative, Eleanor's foundation with Lydia Beaumont, to ensure ongoing oversight of workplace conditions. Leo, for his part, kept a low profile. He attended only the most critical board meetings and avoided flashy public appearances. When reporters ambushed him outside Harrington Enterprises' sleek Midtown headquarters, he offered measured statements about cultural reform and renewed corporate responsibility. No one was fully convinced at first. How could they be after such a high-profile scandal? But the slow, steady pace at which Harrington Enterprises rebuilt its reputation eventually silenced most skeptics. Eleanor threw herself into growing the Quinn Beaumont Initiative. What started as a small foundation quickly ballooned into a national force. They sponsored legal aid clinics, created scholarship programs for women in business, and facilitated high-level seminars on ethical management. As word spread, major corporations sought out Eleanor and Lydia for consultancy, hoping to avoid the fate that had befallen Harrington Enterprises. Together, Eleanor and Lydia turned the foundation into a beacon of accountability, channeling the negative energy of the scandal into a constructive mission. Corporate America began to notice, and some forward-thinking executives invited the initiative to conduct audits of their HR practices and management structures. By the end of the year, even the once skeptical business press ran headlines lauding Eleanor's philanthropic leadership, calling her the voice of reason for a new era. Amid these changes, Sarah Morris lingered in the public consciousness, but never quite regained her former allure. She attempted to monetize her infamy by launching a new line of self-branded products, from perfumes to skimpy athleisure, but her controversies hung like an albatross around her neck. A leaked behind-the-scenes video of her berating her creative team quickly went viral, further tarnishing her persona. Tabloids occasionally reported her dalliances with other wealthy men, but none of these relationships lasted long. Rumors persisted that she was trying to land a book deal or a reality show based on her side of the Harrington fiasco, but the public appetite for Sarah's sob story had waned. Each new stunt felt more desperate than the last, and soon her social media followers began to dwindle. In short, her star was falling, and no amount of self-promotion could reverse gravity. All the while, Leo and Eleanor took increasingly larger strides toward understanding each other anew. Their weekends began to fill with activities that had once bonded them in the early days of their marriage. Sometimes they visited art galleries, lingering in front of paintings and discussing the brush strokes in hushed tones. Other times, they'd pick out recipes and cook together in a warm, inviting kitchen, far from the sterile marble counters of their old penthouse. They bickered over which spices to use, then laughed it off while sipping red wine out of mismatched glasses. The paparazzi at first tried to track this potential reunion. However, the pair's refusal to indulge any sensational narratives gradually made them less interesting. With no shouting matches on the streets, no dramatic slaps or tearful public confessions, the tabloids had little to latch on to. The media eventually moved on, chasing newer, more sensational stories. Their counseling sessions became less frequent, shifting from a weekly necessity to a monthly check-in. They spoke more about the future than the past. Could they trust each other's intentions moving forward? Would their bond stand firm if faced with another crisis? They didn't have all the answers, but they were willing to keep asking the questions. One bright autumn afternoon, clear and crisp, with the leaves in Central Park blazing in shades of amber and crimson, Leo and Eleanor found themselves strolling along a winding path near the lake. The air smelled of wood smoke and roasted chestnuts from nearby street vendors. There were no bodyguards trailing them, no personal assistants taking notes. Just two people, rediscovering the city and each other under a canopy of falling leaves. They eventually reached the Bow Bridge, its iconic arches draped in golden ivy. Leaning against the railing, they watched rowboats glide by on the water. A playful breeze scattered leaves across the surface, sending tiny ripples that shimmered in the late afternoon sunlight. Eleanor turned toward Leo. "Have you ever noticed how couples flock to this bridge for proposals, wedding photos, even just slow dances in the twilight?" Leo followed her gaze to a young couple perched near the center, posing for a photographer. A glimmer of a smile touched his lips. "I guess you could say it's a place of second chances, for all sorts of love stories." She nodded, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "I think about second chances a lot these days." They paused, letting the gentle hum of the city fill the space between them. Even in the distance, taxi horns and bustling crowds were a soft cacophony, reminding them of the life that continued outside this little pocket of tranquility. Leo turned to face her, his voice earnest. "I never thought I'd earn one with you, but I'm trying to do better every day, not just for me, for us, and for the people who look to us for leadership." Eleanor reached for his hand. It was a small gesture, but carried the weight of everything they'd been through. Her voice was tinged with cautious optimism. "I've seen your efforts. I've felt the difference in the way you talk, the things you do, the time you take to reflect. We still have a long road ahead, but I'd rather walk it together than alone." He squeezed her hand gently. "Me too." They stood there, side by side, watching the sun cast dappled shadows across the water. In that moment, the journey that had started with heartbreak and betrayal looped back to a quiet sort of hope. Nothing would ever be as it was before, but they had accepted that. In fact, they came to realize it wasn't such a bad thing. Growth often required letting the old versions of themselves fall away like the autumn leaves, making room for new beginnings. Harrington Enterprises, under its revised leadership structure, began to flourish again, marked now by a culture of empathy rather than fear. The Quinn Beaumont initiative expanded its reach to several international cities, championing fair labor practices and gender equality. Sarah, for her part, remained on the fringes, making occasional headlines that flared and then fizzled. As another breeze rustled the tree branches overhead, Leo turned to Eleanor, meeting her calm, steady gaze. "You know," he said, his tone almost playful, "for the first time in a long while, I'm looking forward to what tomorrow brings." Eleanor's lips curved into a soft smile. "So am I. Let's see what we can build, together." And with that, they left the Bow Bridge hand in hand, blending into the throng of park visitors who had no idea they were brushing shoulders with a billionaire and his wife who had fallen, risen, and dared to find their way back to one another. Their story, once marred by scandal, was now anchored by a choice to move beyond regret, embracing the hard-won promise of a second chance. Sometimes the biggest battles are not fought in boardrooms or headline-grabbing ceremonies, but within the chambers of the human heart. In the end, Leo discovered that true wealth lies in the loyalty and dignity he once took for granted, and Eleanor rose stronger than ever, championing not only her own self-respect, but the well-being of those who found themselves under abusive authority. Their journey through betrayal, scandal, and ultimate redemption shows us how even the most shattered bonds can be mended with genuine remorse, perseverance, and understanding. If you were captivated by this roller coaster of emotions and twist-filled drama, be sure to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more riveting stories. Your support helps us bring you deeper into the world of love, loss, and redemption, one dramatic tale at a time. Thank you for watching.